Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Social Club at the End of the World. I'm Jamin Shively, broadcasting from Seattle, Washington. Happy to be joined by Dan Bader from Chicago, Doctorus Newtopia in Arizona, and Jason in Long Beach, California. Why doesn't everyone say hello? Good morning. Any initial thoughts? And then we can get rolling with our first topic, which Dan will kick off. Just feel free to jump in. I'm going to go on mute and let everyone say hello.
Hello.
All righty.
Good to see everybody.
Likewise. And thank you all for tuning in. I know we've been getting lots of views and comments, and we'll address the comments at the end. But first, I'd like to kick it over to Dan so you can give us a recap of an interesting meeting. I think it was yesterday that you had. I'll take it away, Dan.
Yeah. Yesterday, I was at a meeting of an environmental book club, which I belong to at a UU church. And we had been reading the Paul Hawken book, Drawdown. And, the book Drawdown has a collection of solutions, interventions to draw down carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and to maintain the current carbon sinks that exist in the world so that the greenhouse gas, the carbon dioxide is not released up into the atmosphere. And the book Drawdown is premised on what could be done from 2020 to 2050. So we've had some discussions yesterday discussing land use. And one of the things that I've noted, even within the confines of this group, is there is some resistance to looking at a short-term outlook on climate change, a la Guy McPherson, Peter Wadhams, and others. And it's one of these things where it's almost as if, walking on the sunny side of the street is essential for people to keep their psychological, emotional equilibrium. And I know that there's other books that people could be reading that would address the dire situation, which is what brought us all together here at the Social Club at the End of the World, essentially off of Guy McPherson's general hypothesis that time is short. It's really just at best a matter of years. And that, Peter Wadhams and some others feel that that short-term time frame may be correct, but that some things could be done short-term to stave it off or prevent it from running its full course. And I just wanted to say that even within the confines of an environmental book club, it's true in other organizations like 350.org, people who are very concerned about the environment have not assimilated the danger that actually is possibly very imminent. So I just want to mention a few thoughts that I have about that resistance, that unwillingness to look Guy McPherson's hypothesis, just look it in the eye. And one of the things that I've mentioned before that I want to reiterate is that when we are children and we come into the world and we have virtually no experience about the world, we become dependent on our elders, our parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, teachers, older siblings, to essentially let us know what the world is about, what's safe, what's not safe, what's good behavior, bad behavior. And because we do not have, at that point, the ability to think in a critical fashion, our brains have not evolved to the point where we can really exercise critical thinking. So we are programmed, I would say, hardwired to accept what we learn as children as being the gospel. Beliefs, we all talk about beliefs. But if you really step back and you say, what is a belief? A belief is something which is a powerful facilitator of actions. Because once you have a belief, it removes anxiety over consequences, or shame, guilt over consequences, and you can proceed to act in the world without having to be paralyzed with indecision. So people come up in the world. When you get to a certain age, you do develop the capacity to think critically, and you can reject things. But if you remain ignorant as an adult, and we're all ignorant about a lot of things. For example, Jamin is a highly educated engineer, civil engineer. So if Jamin were to tell me something about civil engineering, which I have no real knowledge of, I would relate to Jamin as an authority figure, and I'll tell, oh yeah, okay, I got it. And I may assimilate that as being true. Whether it is or not, I wouldn't have any way of knowing, but I would accept Jamin as a civil engineer authority figure. And so what we have when we look at climate change, we have to ask the question, who are the authority figures that are giving us our information about it? And as I mentioned before, if you take someone like Donald Trump, who feels that climate change, global warming, global heating, whatever you call it, is not a danger. If that's what he believes, you then ask the question. Donald Trump is probably very ignorant about the scientific evidence revolving around climate change. He doesn't know about it. And therefore, who are his authority figures? Well, Rex Tillerson is the Secretary of State, and Exxon has been, essentially financing people in academia, people in think tanks who put out disinformation fundamentally about what's happening with climate change. So you can expect politicians who accept, information from Exxon and other energy company sources as being authority figures. They will pretty much take that home. And once you have the belief, this little set of beliefs about this, you will no longer be able to easily assimilate counter evidence that contravenes what it is you believe. That's the nature of a belief. So I think you have this kind of a problem, and the practical way that it could be solved would be if we could get authority figures who do not have economic self-interest at stake to speak about these issues. Then the population, most of whom are very ignorant about what's happening, would be able to take on the views of those who are actually willing to present evidence to back up what their hypothesis is. Final thing I'm going to say, which I said before at one of our recent meetings, Guy McPherson is somebody who has presented evidence. I mean, I think it's his Monster Climate Change essay, which stopped in August 2016, basically lays out all of the journal articles, all the sources he's using to spin out what his hypothesis is about. And I have never really heard on a public stage his hypothesis really disputed. What you hear all the time are a series of ad hominem attacks, that he's a doomsayer, that, he's just getting everybody afraid. He's it goes on and on that way. And yet there's never any serious confrontation concerning the evidence. And whenever a climatologist, someone like, say, Michael Mann, who likes to talk about we don't want to upset the population, they can't really handle it, and we shouldn't be doing that, and we have to be very careful, science moves in a very slow, careful manner, has not really disputed the evidence that Guy McPherson and others put out there. And so at this point in time, if we just sit and do nothing in the way of waking up, raising the consciousness, we will reach a point where there are too many self-reinforcing feedback loops that have kicked in. If the trees start dying and the plants can't photosynthesize, then it'll be, well, now we're really in it. And then suddenly everybody will have, great anxiety and hysteria, and then we'll be forced, and we should really be talking about it now, ethical issues concerning life and death, should that occur. So I just wanted to mention that I have been in contact with people who are serious advocates of social justice and improving the environment in various forums, venues, and I still find that there is great denial that seems to be there, and it's almost as long as that remains, we're probably going, we're being swept along on the rapids, and we're going to soon go over the fall. So I'm going to go ahead and mute out and let somebody pick it up.
Last week you talked, Dan, about serotonin and looking at hierarchies. And so afterwards I started being curious about that, did my own research, a little bit of research about that. And yeah, that the dominant male monkey has more serotonin. And then the rest of the monkeys in the line, in the pecking order, have less, and their lives become more depressed. And so then I started bringing that back to the alpha male in humans. And I think that is like a big motivation point why we have this problem of the dominant male wanting to be whatever, the billionaire, the savior, and because they're getting power through that. Their brains are giving them serotonin, this feel-good kind of chemistry. Now, the interesting thing about it, that they found that the alpha male is not the one, he doesn't get there through violent confrontation. He gets there through grooming other monkeys, through cooperation. It's a popularity game. Now, I think this whole status and the hierarchical system that is in nature, and that certainly we can see it in the human species. If you look at this book I read, I can't remember the name of it, but it was about Easter Island. That island was destroyed. They cut down all the trees because of competition for status. And somehow they cut down the trees because they were building something or another, and their whole island, the forests were cut down for this reason. Species have gone extinct because of status. For example, women that had feathers in their hair, in their hat. this became fashionable at certain periods of time. And so those feathers of those birds went extinct. So I think that this whole idea of status and hierarchy really needs to be looked at as the reason why we're in this situation. And is there a way? How do we change this? Is there a way to do that? And how do we do that?
Just a quick interjection on what you're saying, doctors. You know, part of within the primate paradigms of the hierarchies, one of the things that takes place is there is hardwired displaced aggression, so that in the kind of paradigm I was talking about, the number 5, the lowest caste or lowest monkey, is subject to not only the dominance of the number 1 alpha monkey, but will be receiving aggression from the others in the hierarchy. And what essentially happens then is, for sure, as long as you can displace your aggression, you know, the old, the guy is at work, he gets stepped on by the boss. He doesn't want to say anything against the boss because he wants to keep his job. He goes home. He then displaces his anger that he has at the boss on the wife or the kids or whoever. And then, of course, they will do the same thing. So that when you have these hierarchies that are not monitored, self-monitored, you know, in terms of what you're doing and why you're doing it, we have all sorts of aggression, abuse. We have a lot of verbal abuse, physical abuse, and you could argue in some cases even sexual abuse that has to do with these authoritarian hierarchies. And it is something which is, you know, really important to look at. And I can say from my experience, you know, when I was working as a therapist, that it's very, very much an environmental cause of mental health problems. And it's compounded by the fact that people in, you know, the vast majority of situations will be abusive towards themselves. So, for example, if you don't really have an outlet where you can safely put out your, you know, aggression because you're angry over somebody treating you badly or something happening, then you can always turn it on yourself. And you can start to say to yourself, what a loser you are, how worthless you are, how unattractive you are. And this becomes a very common maintenance factor in mental health issues, mental health problems. And so it's very, very relevant in a lot of ways. And of course, at this point in time, I think that hierarchical abuse is probably as bad as I've ever seen it, you know, in my lifetime. You know, it's just, it's permeated everything. And with, you know, and of course with Donald Trump as the president, it's there you have, you know, kind of a unrepressed alpha male, you know, doing his act, you know, over the country, and if he had his way, the entire world. And people are able to understand, oh yeah, this guy is, you know, he's a nightmare. He's an abusive person and blah, blah, blah. But you need to look no further than probably your own home or your own workplace to find exactly the same kind of thing, which is much more directly impinging on you, your mental health, your well-being, than anything Donald Trump might be saying or doing. And so I'm going to go ahead and mute out. I just wanted to interject on, build off of what you said.
Yeah, so I really think, at least the things that I'm questioning is about leadership and how does it arise? You know, and how do we manage it? Is there a way to manage this? And, you know, our electoral process doesn't seem to be electing people that are really looking out for people.
So, Doctress, so you're kind of saying that this looking for status and having a hierarchy is one of the biggest things that sort of causes most of the ills in society.
At least, there was a book on partnership society. You know, women and men having a different kind of relationship, partnership model. And she talks in that book, it's called Chalice or the Blade, that there are two kinds of hierarchies. You know, one is domination hierarchy, and the other one is an actualization hierarchy. You know, so what we're trying to create is that actualization hierarchy that allows for this different alignment with our planet to happen. Even, you know, even in the ancient goddess civilizations, you know, you had female leadership that worked in relationship with that leader in order to create that goddess civilization.
So I would say, though, that leads me to think that, you know, you got to think about capitalism in order to think about that. And I think if you think about capitalism, to have a higher class of people in an upper echelon, it requires taking advantage of other people, taking advantage of their labor, you know, giving them less money for their labor and kind of scraping that off the top and accumulating wealth. And, you know, I feel like the hierarchical system is integral or inherent in capitalism. And so I feel like...
it's also within the communist system. You see ruling elites in every single order that we have created. You know, so what do you do about that? What do we do that everybody's intelligence is not equal?
I've got an a Horseshack style answer to that question with a reference to Welcome Back, Kotter. What we do is we start a revolution and we carry that revolution worldwide. A love-olution, to use your term, Doctress, if I may, and if what you and I are talking about are consistent, which I think they are. And as with any revolution, you have to start with rolling the heads of those at the top of the existing dominant, oppressive, destructive hierarchy. And the person who comes to mind at the very top is not Donald Trump or any of the political leaders, but actually Bill Gates. And when I say roll heads, I don't mean physically roll the heads, but, you know, metaphorically. And so I'm actually going to start tweeting on this because I know Bill Gates, have worked with him professionally years back. I don't consider him a friend. I don't think he considers me a friend. We're not enemies or anything, but I certainly have the credibility and the track record to be able to speak with some authority, to Dan's earlier point about authority. And I think what's in order is a public exposing of Bill Gates and his ideology, because he has become really the naked emperor He is the emperor's new clothes is very much at play here, because he is surrounded by people, advisors, right, colleagues, who are continually just lauding him for being so great and so generous. Oh, Emperor, you're so wonderful. Oh, look at your wonderful clothes. And Bill Gates, his recent tweets, his recent communiques are all about how wonderful the world is and how we're so much better off than we used to be, right? And, you know, what he's really saying is, you know, don't blame me. Everything's good, you know, and he cites this book that one of his buddies recently published, you know, that talks a bit just about how wonderful everything is, and that, you know, people emphasize the negative, but they're not emphasizing the positive. So I'm going to start a series of tweets, and really, you know, in a nonviolent, compassionate way, rip Bill Gates a new one for being the biggest hoarder on earth. And, you know, yes, he does philanthropy. He's like, he wants to have it all. He wants to be the biggest hoarder on earth and the greatest philanthropist. Well, you really can't have it both ways. Either you're a major sociopathic hoarder or you're not. And so, number one, we need to roll the heads of the folks at the top. The billionaire class is getting richer by about 20% per year. Their wealth is growing at about 20% per year. How does that happen in a contracting economy? Very simple. You steal it from others. They're systematically stealing wealth from all the other segments of society. And it's just become this giant vacuum cleaner, just vacuuming up all the wealth. And that is, not only does that kill and destroy lives of billions of other people, but it also destroys the planet, per your earlier comment about Easter Island. In fact, I say we rename planet Earth Easter Planet, right? Because what you talked about happening on Easter Island is exactly what's happening on planet Earth. Exactly. People are chopping down the trees and pumping out the oil, not because they need these resources to eat, but for status. So they can have bigger and bigger McMansions on the lake, bigger and bigger cars, boats, jet aircraft, you know, and then in addition to the main mansion, you got to have your cabin in the mountains. You got to have your beach house over on San Juan Island, you know, and so it's just this hoarding for status, and so all that needs to be overturned. But I think we really need to start at the top. I'm going to take aim at Bill Gates and really expose his sociopathy and the destructive patterns that he has been encouraging by his own example. And in how he invests his money building this city in Arizona it's just a real estate play to make a bunch of billions to try to retake the #1 spot, which Jeff Bezos has passed him up. But anyway, that's one way. And then the other way is then what do you replace it with? Okay, so if we're gonna overturn the dominant paradigm of hierarchy and hoarding and all that, what do we replace it with? And I think that's something that we're pioneering right here on the Social Club at the End of the World. To my knowledge, there's no hierarchy here. We are an egalitarian community, and that is working together without rulers, but with rules. And so I think, anyway, there's so much. Anyway, I'm going to kick it over to Jason because I know he has a lot more to say about this. And so go on mute.
Well, I was just going to say, I think you're giving Bill Gates too much credit. You're making him sound like he's the emperor of the capitalist system, the Western capitalist industrialized system. And that's giving him way too much credit. Yeah, he may be a billionaire who's got the money to build this eco city or whatnot. But I mean, the overarching problem in my mind is more systemic than it is one person. I mean, tons of people cooperate in the systemic delusion that's causing the destruction.
Totally. No, I'm just saying we need to take aim at one person and make an example out of that one person, right? Because really my target is the entire billionaire and multi-hundred millionaire and multi-10 millionaire class. Basically anyone who's hoarding wealth that's way in excess of what they need. So, but we start at the top. We make an example. See, heads need to roll, metaphorically. That's what I'm saying, Jason. And it's a lot easier to get one head to roll than 10,000.
Well, look, you're going to name Bill Gates, you know, but if you name the drug cartels, then, you know, your tongue is tied.
Yeah. If I could interject just quickly, and one thing that needs to be understood is that we're all hardwired with a very basic sense of fairness. It's fundamentally, if I have 4 pieces of food and I'm with somebody else, if I give them 2 pieces and I keep 2, we're good. We're going to be just fine. If I want to keep 3 pieces of food and give the other individual 1, the other individual will become angry over the unfairness. Unfairness is a trigger for the emotion we call anger. It's one of a number. And so the problem is, if I want to get away with giving that person 1 piece of food, keep 3 to myself, I must convince that person that this division is fair. And the way it's done is I must let the person understand through authority figure input that they only deserve 1. They're lucky they have just 1 piece because they are so unworthy. So it's actually fair. And that little paradigm is what is actually exercised throughout the culture and the society. If you are born into a very wealthy family, what has to happen is you're going to come up as a child and you're going to have that instinctive sense of fairness. And everybody has it. And it's very adaptive in a lot of living arrangements historically that have existed. But what's going to happen is that child of the wealthy elite must come to understand that having so much more than everybody else is fair. We're more intelligent than everybody else. We're more industrious. We're more creative. We deserve it. The other people are a little better, than zombies. They don't know how to think well. They don't behave well. They don't have discipline, et cetera, whatever you want to throw into the rationalizations for the unfairness. And so this is something where people, again, people need to kind of understand it. I mean, if you look historically with groups of people who are kept down, who are really abused in a status hierarchy, there's always explanations for it. In India, the untouchables, that caste, deserved to be where they were because of what they did in past lifetimes. No problem. It's fair. Don't complain. You're getting what you deserve. And then maybe you can go on in the next lifetime and be in a higher caste. Or in this society, fundamentally, we like to say, well, go ahead and get an education. Go ahead and pull yourself up. Behave well. But the problem is there are so many environmental constraints on people really being able to function effectively when they're living in near poverty, and are afflicted with other kinds of problems they don't really understand. And so I think that, Bill Gates and people who are in, what you would call, when we had the Occupy movement, the 1%, today, I think it's fair to say we actually have maybe about 20%, the upper middle class, the professional class. They pretty much adhere to an ideology that they deserve everything they get. The other people are, if you don't call them deplorables or something like that, they deserve what it is they have. And that particular paradigm to explain the inequality, the unfairness, it needs to be exposed for what it is and how it works. Because the children, very rarely do you see a child of the wealthy elites really go against the system. And it is systemic because this particular economic system that we have and that has, reigned, whether you call it capitalism, neoliberalism, whatever labels you attach to it, is basically a powerful incentive for people who are able to exploit everybody else and to increase their wealth. And I would even add on to that, they need to convince themselves in order to keep doing it, that it is actually fair. It's the best we could possibly hope for.
Well, if you look at the Russian Revolution, the Marxists certainly talked about this legacy of wealth and the ruling class that became the wealthy class. They tried to do away with it. They did away with it. And then a new hierarchy rose up, the Communist Party members, which then they weren't any better. And in some ways, they were even worse. Or certainly they were not enlightened people. And that, yeah, I did a research paper on that. You know, they had some visionaries there. And Lenin, the revolutionary hero, certainly he couldn't listen to those people. He had no insight about how to really liberate the arts. And so that revolution failed. They started to go into manufacturing nuclear weapons in order to compete with the United States. And then the Cold War eventually arose. So you're not talking, you know, you got to really look at the history of revolution to understand the pitfalls of that. And I don't know, I've been reading this week about the Department of Energy. You got to be real careful about revolutions. We do, because we have all of this high-level radioactive waste that cannot go into an anarchical situation.
So we definitely know what we don't want to repeat, which is a repeat of the Russian Revolution or the Cuban Revolution or so many revolutions where it was simply the replacement of one oppressive hierarchy with another. So how do we get rid of hierarchy altogether? And how do we have a society and a world absent of rulers, but not absent of rules? And I think that's one of the things that's often misunderstood about anarchy is that, you know, there's different flavors of anarchy, but the pure one that I have notions of is not an absence of rules. It's not chaos. It's an absence of rulers, but a highly evolved system of rules. Rules for protecting the environment, protecting Mother Earth, protecting people, right? And I think we can get there. And I think the path to getting there is through collective intelligence. We need to collectively co-create this new system. So the two main ingredients that I propose are the rolling of heads, the selective rolling of heads, so that we signal to society that this won't be tolerated anymore. You know, the takedown of Harvey Weinstein is a perfect example of rolling of heads starting at or near the top. The destruction of Donald Trump as president, which is ongoing, hasn't been completed yet. That's another example of rolling of heads. So we're in this rolling of heads phase, and it can go in many directions from here. We could just devolve into total chaos, Mad Max, but I say we work very hard to create a new system using our collective intelligence. In other words, we don't look to a Lenin or a Fidel Castro or any one person to, you know, define how the new system is going to be. We co-create it collectively, all of us working together. Going on mute.
Yeah, and just I think Jason can maybe pick up here because I think Daniel Pinchbeck in his book kind of argues pretty much that we do need to have a revolution in consciousness, and if not, you know, even though he may not sign on to a very short time frame, he signs on, I think, to a medium range time frame, and that you are going to have a complete disintegration of the planet. And so I think it's pretty fundamental that there has to be a change in consciousness. And he talks about some ideas about what a democracy could be, and kind of being able to have localized groupings, etc. But I do think that the system, whether and hierarchy is a big part of it. This is hardwired into all human beings. The communist revolution in Russia went wrong. The revolution in China went wrong, particularly the Cultural Revolution, when gangs of adolescents were given the power to directly humiliate and take down the professional classes that existed in China at that time. And so we have plenty of history, as you're mentioning, doctors, to look at, and try to distill what is the problem. And I do think that hierarchical abuse and other psychological, emotional components are part of it. But I do think that, because of what's happening to the climate, we unfortunately don't have a lot of time to really get things going in terms of this revolution. So maybe I'll turn it over to, or maybe Jason, you want to pick it up and say a little bit about Daniel Pinchbeck's ideas.
It is kind of interesting because at one point, I believe this is on YouTube, but you, Jamin, Daniel Pinchbeck, and Guy McPherson all had like a conversation. Is that still on YouTube? And I think it's interesting.
I don't think that one has actually been published yet. We ran into the person who was doing the video editing became completely unavailable recently, and so we don't have any more editing, and so I don't think it's been published yet. I think I just shared it amongst us, but it hasn't been published yet. Back to you.
Yeah. But it was interesting just because I guess I've only seen it, so no one else really out there has seen it. But in Guy McPherson's little bit, he actually says something that I think is like an ode to you and to that conversation with him, where he's like, no, conscious awakening is going to save us. I guess where I kind of land at this point is I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's impossible to save all 7 billion inhabitants of planet Earth. I feel like it's inevitable that things are going so quickly downhill. I see it as maybe if there's some sort of a conscious awakening of a certain segment of the population that maybe they can save themselves. But anyways, in his book, there's a whole section called Part 5, Post-Capitalism, Property, Money, and Power. And, I don't want to go into detail in there, but he does have some interesting arguments about, first part is possession trance, the problem with property, and sort of talking about property right there and private property and how that's maybe part of the problem and how we would need to think about commons, for instance. If the poor, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the money problem where he kind of goes into talking about money. I believe in there, he even sort of gets like the guy behind the Venus Project is mentioned right about here, which it's interesting because sometimes we get comments from somebody who always says we should look into reaching out to Peter Joseph and his whole network of people who are, the Zeitgeist movement or whatnot, because at least there's a network of people there. Not a bad idea.
Yeah.
But he does, bring up Jock, and then, but that's sort of the idea of like this, currently money is at a certain exchange, but maybe that there'd have to be this moral sort of change of what we consider valuable. So maybe, for future, if we're going to do anything about the problem, it would have to be considered valuable, or people would have to be, paid or have some sort of maybe motivation to do something positive, And that would really probably require changing the money system, changing the economic system. I believe everybody here could agree with that. And I guess, you know, maybe that's part of why a lot of the doomers and Guy McPherson think it's impossible, because people have been talking about needing a revolution of this kind for a long time, but it's never happened. And then, you know, so that I just thought that was interesting because it kind of leads into a conversation about that. And we're sort of always seem to be trying to get to the root cause of what the problem is, so that maybe that there could be something done about it. Anyways, I'm over.
Yeah, I really think it's, you know, this new relationship between women and men, and it's leaning towards the divine feminine, listening to women's visions that have been ignored for all of this, you know, 5 millennium, and building on the values of women. That's how I see it happening. And as long as men continue to want to play the dominant role, then I don't think it will happen. I think that what women need are helpmates. You know, in our society now, women are the helpmates of men. We follow their vision. We work to do their task. And that's got to change. And we've got to see women as the wisdom givers. And then perhaps things will shift, you know, because then women will have the men behind their visionary leadership. And perhaps then we'll have a movement. Until then, it's not going to happen, because men will continue to give their visions and they'll continue to be the dominant ones, which leads down to roads where people's heads start getting chopped off.
But I mean, in this country, even, we recently had a big women's march, and, you know, I feel like it's still head buttoned up against other women. I hear out there in my daily life, I've heard other women talking down about the women's march. Like, I don't know what they're marching out there for. So you're obviously still dealing with women who don't see the world the way in which you do.
You know, yeah, it takes a lot to all of a sudden go, yeah, I've got a vision out here, and the men need to step behind me, or at least work beside me to do it. But, you know, they have been conditioned to not think that way. There are very few men that will be helpmates to women in any kind of intellectual way. And then what they'll do is they'll steal their ideas. They'll steal them right under you. And they'll do it their way.
You know, just to a little bit of follow-up, and it reminds me of a little bit of our discussion last week. I think that, you know, what you're saying, doctors, about the discrepancy in terms of status, power, control along gender lines is correct. That's part of the programming of beliefs, the ideological input. But it's also the case, and I think this is something which does need to be underlined. We also have the class-based ideology input. And whether you are a man or a woman, if you are up there with the wealthy elites or a good many of the professional classes who really benefit from our current system greatly, and the women in the, and I'm not saying all women, but a lot of women in the upper middle class and the wealthy elites even more so, are very concerned about their children. and they want their children to be able to have and maintain the lifestyle that they have been born into. And there is obviously, you know, with women, there's much more of a concern with the welfare of children. And I'm just saying that very generally. But I think that it's important that the women who, in a sense, are in the upper middle class and the wealthy elites be able to speak out about the class differentiation, which they benefit from tremendously. And that being able to weave that in would be a real contribution to going forward. Because what I find right now is, and this goes beyond the gender differentiation, is we have all these differentiations. You know, we have the racial ones, we have the sexual identity ones, we have the gender, though that's fine, because these status differences are part of the system. But the one that is concerned with hoarding all of this wealth and being able to maintain a ridiculous lifestyle in a sense, doesn't really have to do with anything other than the class-based economic incentives that we have in our current system. And as this, you know, and as climate change starts to wreak more and more havoc on the entire world, if this kind of a differentiation is there, I would point out that some people believe that at a certain point, the very wealthy elites are going to try to find some ways, you know, to save their lives and take care of their families. And again, the assumption there is we deserve to be able to live where, you know, billions deserve to die, in essence, or it's not our responsibility for perpetuating the system. And I think these kinds of things really need to be discussed, and they need to be discussed even if Guy McPherson and others, their short-term outlook does not come to pass. Because I think if you really look at what people are saying, nobody believes that this can continue on much beyond, you know, decades, or at most, you know, probably by the year 2100. And you see all sorts of information out there kind of suggesting that, you know, that the energy companies, I forget which ones are, they have plans to exist in a world which is 5 centigrade above what we are now in terms of the average global temperature. And without having discussions of all these issues and the energy really put into it, it just seems like we are trapped. We're destined for Easter Island. You know, we're going over the waterfall. The rapids are really speeding up, and so without having consciousness raised about a number of issues and people being able to wrestle with the possibility that life isn't going to continue. And by the way, if that is the case, do you want to go Mad Max, or do you want to make a decision well in advance of whether it's 10 years, 30 years, that you aren't going to participate in a Mad Max kind of world, that you would maybe prefer to let yourself pass on rather than be a part of that kind of activity. And if people don't think about these things in advance, there's little chance that they will resist Mad Max types of solutions, etc. So I just want to throw that in there. I'm going to go mute out.
Well, that's why I've gotten into yoga and looking more into spiritual practice. To me, we all need to have a spiritual practice and to be able to connect with the sanctuary within. So whatever happens to the world around us, we have that calm peace within. And that's what spiritual practice does. And without that, it's just completely grasping for this power, this domination that I see, that I no longer want to contribute to. And finally, I'll say, as far as like revolution or evolutionary change, like my Facebook friend, Cindy Sheehan, whose son was killed in the Iraq War, and she went to Bush's ranch during that time and had a camp. She's organizing now a women's march around the Pentagon so that we can really have a voice in where our money is going and point this out, and I think what I'm planning on doing is making a pilgrimage to Trinity in April 6th. The military opens up the Trinity site. That's where the first nuclear weapon was detonated and started the nuclear age. It's on a military base, so they open it up twice a year for one day. So I would like to do a pilgrimage there, do a ritual there, do some yoga there, and just clear the energy in my head about the nuclear age, because we cannot really understand history and what to do about it without understanding the history of nukes and where it has led us.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, this is a great discussion. I make a motion. It's quarter till the top of the hour. I make a motion that we take a look at the comments from last week's social club at the end of the world. Is everyone game to do that now? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Sure.
Okay. All right. All right. Let me then pull it up, and I'll just do a screen share here, and then we can review it. Yep, January 23rd. Okay. Here it goes. Here it goes. Screen share. And by the way, I won't be able to either mute my microphone or see anyone while I'm doing screen share. So just jump in if you have something to say. So this is from last week. Here are the comments. I'm just going to bypass the ones that are just generally negative and don't.
Wait a minute. I want to see the one about feminism. I lasted up to end the feminist stuff. What does that mean? I lasted up to end the feminist stuff. Okay.
I lasted up to minute 33 is basically what he's saying.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's one I just want to bypass because there's really nothing being contributed there. It's just negative, right? He's labeling some of the things that we're talking about as feminist. Here's the positive one. I like Dan's rational approach. He's a realist. And then we got a couple replies. Very nice. Seems very nice. All right. And then
Jamin, if I could just jump in and say whoever left that particular comment, I really appreciate it. And you guys know I love using the expression reality on the ground and being seen as someone who is realistic in a lot of ways. Thank you.
Great. Great. And then George Holdsworth writes, I've only done some research on the underground cities highways that connect from Colorado to Washington, D.C. to Maine. The elites seem well prepared for the end of the world. If population reduction is the best but immoral solution, then it looks like that is the direction we are going. Do the wealthy elite understand the nuclear power plants will most likely neuter the Earth by wiping out our atmosphere? Keep up the great work, you guys, and doctorate. My degree is in meteorology, but climate change has always been my passion. I want to do more, but when I bring up these topics at work or social events, the majority laugh at climate change, and it's just sad the corporations have done such a great job at brainwashing. That was, I thought, a really great comment. And then he follows up by saying, I think one of the biggest issues is that there is such a small percent that can even comprehend the Guy McPherson message. And for that small fraction that even do understand the paradox, mainly fall under the category of no hope. So we have even a smaller fraction or percent that truly understand and want to work towards a solution. How do we solve the first paradox before we can get people on board for a mass transformation? Really great points, George. My goodness. He's hitting the nail on the head. You know, it's like, of the small fraction who get the Guy McPherson message, the vast majority go into hopelessness and say there's nothing that can be done. So that leaves darn few of us who are both A, understand Guy McPherson, and B, want to work towards, I hesitate to use the word solution because that generally brings an avalanche of people saying, oh, there are no solutions, it's too late. And I just point to my earlier comments, including 2 days ago, Love at the End of the World, episode 3, where we talk about between solutions and hopelessness. Any other comments on George's comments here? All right.
I was going to say, Jamin, that kind of not really necessarily on George's, but in general, it made me think of this, and I was thinking it earlier. You were kind of suggesting possibly going after individuals, like heads rolling and whatnot. It seems to me that sometimes without some of those people's help, if we chastise all those people, for instance, we'll never be able to get their help. Not that they are going to help us, but it seems to me that we'd need civilization's help to bring a clean end to everything. Like, we'd need a lot of people. So it's sort of like a paradox unto itself that we're sort of talking about. If we're really going to save the planet, we would need an awakening to happen. And we'd need everybody to work as a unit towards the positive resolution of that problem. But that doesn't seem to be what is happening. People kind of get disillusioned and depressed if they hear Guy McPherson's message, and they kind of splinter off in other directions. Like, I don't want to think about that. You know, I'm going to pretend like I never saw this Guy McPherson guy and I have no fucking clue who he is, kind of thing. And, you know, but it may be the only way to save us if there was an awakening. And if people, once they become awake to the fact, kind of cower away and hide, as we were talking about earlier, or use their beliefs to sort of block it, veil it, that's an issue. Anyways.
Yeah, and just a follow up. If you do the thought experiment, where you just imagine that Donald Trump, instead of his address tonight, were to announce that we do have a climate change emergency, and we are going to be looking at all sorts of solutions, and we're going to do everything we can to mitigate the damage. Suddenly you would have everybody taking it really seriously, because he's such a major authority figure at this point in time. And, you know, people like Bill Gates and the other billionaires don't quite have the ability to influence someone like Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin or others. But they certainly, if they stepped up and started to talk about these things in a realistic way, it would start to have influence. And a lot of the politicians, they basically bow down to the wealthy elite, the billionaires, etc. And if they start talking about what is in fact happening, and that maybe it's unethical to just simply try to save ourselves, like, you know, rats jumping off the ship to survive, that would have a great influence on a lot of politicians. And you would at least have a discussion going on about what is the ethical way to proceed. Because there's a lot of ethical issues which are just not on the table. So I just wanted to throw that in there and let you continue, Jamin.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan and Jason. So the next one is from Steven Stoffers, and I think he's talking about minute 12. Really? Which flavor did you drink? Abrupt climate change turns everything upside down. A death with the best possible maximum meaningful death, Jesus, becomes the death of everyone because we trash the planet. The opposite of a meaningful death and the big picture of abrupt climate change is that we drink the Kool-Aid first and then form social clubs. All right. Well, I think he's probably commenting on my the idea I was articulating a week ago, which I still believe, is that, look, if we are going down, let's do the very best we can before we die, period. If that means shutting down nuclear, it's shutting down nuclear. If it's doing other positive things to enable some life to continue, great. All right, just jump in if you have comments, because like I said, I can't see you when I'm doing screen share. Okay, the next comment, Paul White. If you want to save life on the planet, then a massive project has to take place, one that cultures indigenous beneficial microorganisms to be sprayed over large swaths of land. Put out fires with it, battle tree bark beetles, fight invasives, XYZ. It's called Korean natural farming, also JADAM. I believe it's the only way to make the transformation in the time frame. The principles are applied to water as well. Well, that sounds interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. In fact, Paul, please let us know if you'd be willing to jump on the program and give us an overview of that. And then going south, comments. There are a couple of bad or counterproductive ways of thinking on the green left side that I'd like to comment upon after listening to this week's show. One of them is the optimistic outburst during a time of immense ecological destruction that those development projects really brought us together as activists and as a community. This is the same faulty thinking that brought bliss to the anti-war crowd as Iraq was being destroyed militarily. We need to do better than to celebrate genocide or celebrate devastating abrupt climate change and loss of biodiversity. I don't really know what he's talking about there, but let me see if reading on. The other flawed way of thinking is to say essentially what doctors shared, that abrupt civilizational collapse is just making me sad, so I'll just forget about that whole possibility. This way of thinking is linked to the vastly optimistic and, in my opinion, delusional thought that cities should provide food distribution and other essential services even after a full societal collapse. To me, even suggesting such things is indicative of a mind that hasn't reflected on what a collapse of society and or agriculture even means on the most basic level. I think what he's basically saying there is when we have civilizational collapse, there ain't going to be no food and food distributed. There will just be local pockets of food, and so cities will basically collapse.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that we're going to have a peaceful transition to the new civilization type. That's my vision. That it's not going to be a full collapse of civilization.
Right.
Right. The whole key to this vision is creating world peace. Without peace, there's not going to be a way that we will survive. The planet might survive, which is why I think that a better name for this social club is the end of history than the end of the world, because the end of the world implies that all life will be destroyed. The bacteria might certainly survive along with the cockroaches. So what we're trying to do is in history, move us out of male domination and male visionary thinking that has led to this crisis. Now, I know I've said this a number of times about this social club, but it doesn't get really changed. You still go the end of the world. The world, the planet has gone through 6 mass extinctions And life is still here. It can take a lot. And it's been through some devastating extinctions.
Go ahead, Jason.
During those extinctions, they didn't have 400 plus nuclear power plants on planet Earth that were going to melt down and fucking destroy the atmosphere, as well as they didn't pollute the shit out of everything to the point where it was like, you know, a cleanup fucking nightmare. Like, if we are going to do anything, we need the people in civilization to start working on restoration programs. You know?
Yeah, so I think it's the end of history is what we're after. We're looking for another narrative, and from that narrative inspires a different administration of this planet. So that's what I'm going for.
And I apologize for interrupting, but I do need to sign off because I've got a conference call I'm jumping on. So I'm just going to mute out and let y'all continue as long as you want. And then I'll just end the broadcast.
I'm ready. I have to go too. So I'm going to say goodbye.
Yeah. So
all right. Well,
let's conclude. And yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, great seeing you all, and thank you all for watching. Please continue with the comments. As you can see, we take them very seriously. We appreciate them, and feel free to invite yourself in to the social club at the end of the world. We'd love to have you.
There you go. See, you can't change it. You can't change it. It's all, and you talk about.
He likes it. It has a nice ring to it.
Yeah, no, it's power. It's language. You've already named it. You know, there's no changing it. That's how patriarchy works. So, Jamin, you're really one of them in disguise.
In disguise. All right.
Well, you're very much one. Bye.
Well, we may not come up with any significant ideas to save the world, but at least we can bitch and moan at each other the entire fucking time and have a good time doing it, I guess.
Yeah, I would just, my final thought is, you know, the end of the world is what abrupt climate change is essentially going to bring about. It also does imply the end of history too. So I will concede that. And I look forward to seeing everybody next week.
All right. Well, good seeing you, Dan.
Yeah.
Have a good day.